The world before 9/11. At the dawn of the 21st century, the world stood at a crossroads of confidence and complacency. The Cold War had ended less than a decade earlier, leaving the United States as the sole global superpower. The 1990s were often described as a decade of optimism, a period when technology, globalization, and economic growth seemed to promise a future of endless possibility. The internet was transforming communication. Cell phones were becoming common, and the idea of a connected planet felt exciting and full of hope. The Western world, particularly the United States, enjoyed a sense of safety that had not existed for much of the 20th century. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 symbolized the triumph of democracy and capitalism. Many believed that large-scale wars were now a thing of the past. The American public saw peace as the new normal, with conflicts far away from their own soil. Economically, the late 1990s were marked by rapid expansion. The dot-com boom brought wealth and opportunity to a new generation of entrepreneurs and investors. Major American cities were thriving. Global travel was increasing, and international business connected countries in ways that seemed to make global conflict less likely. Airports were busy but casual. Security checks were brief, almost symbolic. Most people saw flying as routine and safe. Culturally, the United States embraced entertainment and innovation. Hollywood movies, pop music, and emerging digital culture dominated global attention. Reality television was just beginning to take shape, and the world was fascinated by American lifestyle and influence. The country projected confidence, a sense that its democratic model and economic system were permanent fixtures of history. But beneath that surface of prosperity, new dangers were quietly forming. The 1990s were not entirely peaceful. Events in the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia hinted at rising instability. While the general public felt distant from these conflicts, certain analysts and intelligence agencies had begun to notice alarming signs. Terrorism, once seen as a regional issue, was evolving into a global threat. Small extremist networks were starting to coordinate across borders, using new technology to communicate and fund operations. In 1993, the first warning came. A truck bomb exploded beneath the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. It killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. For many Americans, it was an isolated tragedy, not a pattern. The attacker's goal had been to bring down the towers, a plan that failed but exposed vulnerabilities. The public quickly moved on, treating the event as an anomaly rather than a signal. Meanwhile, extremist groups were growing stronger in regions affected by war and political instability. Conflicts in Afghanistan during the 1980s had left behind trained fighters and militant leaders with global ambitions. Among them was Osama bin Laden, a figure who would later become synonymous with global terrorism. During this decade, bin Laden and his followers began to articulate an ideology that rejected Western presence in Muslim lands and sought dramatic, symbolic acts of revenge. For much of the 1990s, these warnings existed in intelligence reports but rarely reached the public consciousness. American life continued uninterrupted. The government focused on domestic issues, economic growth, education, and technology, rather than on distant threats. Even when U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania were bombed in 1998, the national focus returned quickly to internal politics and the booming economy. By 2000, the United States had entered a new century with optimism. President Bill Clinton's administration had ended with a budget surplus. The stock market was near historic highs, and the sense of American dominance seemed absolute. The new president, George W. Bush, took office in January 2001, promising unity and humility in foreign policy. Few imagined that within months, the country would face the deadliest attack on its own soil since Pearl Harbor. At that moment, America was powerful, confident, and unaware of what was to come. To most citizens, threats of terrorism were distant news stories, rarely connected to daily life. Airports were open, trust was high, and the idea of a large-scale coordinated attack seemed impossible. The calm of those final months before September 2001 now feels almost surreal. A world unaware that its sense of security was about to shatter forever. America in the 1990s. To understand the world that existed before 9/11, one must first understand America in the 1990s. A nation at the height of confidence, creativity, and self-belief. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States stood as the undisputed global leader. The absence of a rival superpower created an illusion of permanent safety. Political debates centered on prosperity, not survival. The average citizen no longer feared nuclear war. The new anxiety was whether the stock market would rise or fall. Domestically, America was changing fast, the population was diverse, urbanizing, and increasingly connected through technology. The internet had become the next frontier. Companies like Yahoo, Amazon, and Google were just emerging, shaping a digital economy that few yet understood. Cable television multiplied voices, and CNN brought live global news into every living room. For the first time, world events could be watched as they unfolded. But that constant stream of information also created fatigue. When terrorism appeared on the screen, many viewers simply changed the channel. Politics in the 1990s was defined by optimism mixed with scandal. Bill Clinton, elected in 1992, embodied a new generation of leadership. Young, charismatic, and technologically savvy, his message of modernization and economic reform resonated across party lines. The decade's political conflicts, government shutdowns, impeachment hearings, and partisan media wars played out like theater. Yet beneath the noise, America remained stable. The Cold War had ended without catastrophe. Democracy had triumphed. It felt as if history itself had reached a conclusion. Economically, the United States was thriving. Unemployment was low. Consumer confidence was high. And Wall Street surged. The dot-com boom created thousands of millionaires overnight. Venture capital flowed into technology startups, while ordinary people began investing in the stock market through 401(k) plans. The dream of the new economy promised that knowledge and innovation, not heavy industry, would define the future. Shopping malls expanded, suburban homes grew larger, and air travel became accessible to millions. Airlines competed on comfort and service, not security. Flying was as routine as taking a train. Culturally, the 1990s were defined by a mix of rebellion and comfort. Grunge music and hip-hop captured urban youth, while Hollywood exported American ideals through blockbusters and sitcoms. Shows like Friends and Seinfeld portrayed a carefree urban life where tragedy rarely existed. The internet connected people but also encouraged isolation, a paradox that no one yet recognized. Movies such as Armageddon and Independence Day dramatized global catastrophe. But these were spectacles, not fears. The idea that real life could imitate those stories felt absurd. Foreign policy in the 1990s focused on humanitarian missions rather than existential threats. American troops were deployed in Somalia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. Operations meant to prevent genocide or stabilize fragile regions. These missions were controversial but limited. The public saw them as moral obligations, not wars for survival. When U.S. embassies in East Africa were bombed in 1998, or the USS Cole was attacked in 2000, the events seemed distant. The Clinton administration responded with airstrikes, but terrorism still appeared as a series of isolated incidents. Serious, but manageable. The sense of invincibility extended to intelligence and law enforcement. The FBI and CIA operated within bureaucratic silos. Each confident in its own systems, analysts saw scattered warnings about Al-Qaeda. But without context, those signals seemed minor. The prevailing belief was that terrorism belonged to other parts of the world. The Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, not the United States. Inside the Pentagon and White House, strategic documents mentioned the possibility of an attack, but few policymakers saw it as imminent. America was still adjusting to a world without the Soviet Union. The concept of a decentralized enemy was difficult to grasp. Meanwhile, daily life flourished in comfort. Americans traveled freely, celebrated record prosperity, and embraced digital convenience. Families planned vacations. Corporations expanded overseas. And universities attracted students from every continent. Immigration added energy and diversity to cities. New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and Chicago stood as symbols of the American century. Powerful, multicultural, unstoppable. In hindsight, the signs of danger were there. Intelligence reports warned of plots involving hijackings. Security experts argued that airport screening was inadequate. Yet the larger system rewarded speed and efficiency, not caution. The culture valued openness. Suspicion seemed un-American. Even when threats were identified, agencies struggled to share information across jurisdictions. Every warning was treated as hypothetical, a matter for debate, not emergency. By 2000, the stage was set for transformation. The presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore ended in dispute, and the country entered the new millennium divided but peaceful. The economy began to cool after the collapse of the dot-com bubble. Yet optimism remained strong. Few imagined that a small network of extremists could challenge a nation of such power. The United States had satellites orbiting the planet, aircraft carriers in every ocean, and intelligence networks in nearly every country. From that perspective, danger seemed impossible. The calm confidence of the 1990s became the foundation of vulnerability. It was a decade when success bred complacency, when information moved faster than understanding, and when power felt absolute. America's greatest strength, its openness to the world, would soon become the channel through which tragedy arrived. Looking back, the 1990s stand as a mirror of innocence. A time when the world believed peace was permanent, unaware that history was quietly turning the page. The rise of new threats. While the United States enjoyed peace and prosperity during the 1990s, a different kind of movement was forming quietly in the shadows of distant regions. These were not nations with standing armies or advanced weapons. They were loose networks of individuals bound by ideology, resentment, and a sense of purpose that the Western world underestimated. The roots of this new threat stretched back to the 1980s. During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the United States, along with several allies, had supported Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen. Two American policymakers at the time. This was part of the Cold War strategy, a way to counter Soviet expansion without direct confrontation. Money, weapons, and training flowed into the region, helping local fighters push back against the Soviet military machine. But once the war ended in 1989, many of those fighters did not return to civilian life. They were armed, experienced, and connected by a new kind of religious militancy that transcended national borders. Among these veterans was Osama bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi national who had used his fortune to support the Afghan resistance. During the war, he developed not only logistical expertise but also a network of followers united by a shared belief that their victory over the Soviet Union was a divine sign. Bin Laden and others began to see Western influence, particularly that of the United States, as the next great threat to their faith and way of life. Throughout the 1990s, this ideology evolved into something larger and more organized. In 1988, toward the end of the Afghan conflict, bin Laden and his associates established Al-Qaeda, meaning the base, originally conceived as a support network for Islamic fighters. It gradually transformed into a global movement with political and symbolic ambitions. Its members rejected traditional boundaries of warfare. They believed that striking powerful nations directly, even symbolically, would inspire global resistance. At first, few in the West took these ideas seriously. Al-Qaeda was decentralized, secretive, and difficult to track. It had no fixed territory, no formal army, and no clear leader visible to the public. Yet through this lack of structure, it became more adaptable than any traditional enemy. Using couriers, coded messages, and the early internet, its members coordinated across continents, from Afghanistan and Sudan to Yemen and Pakistan. In 1996, bin Laden issued a public declaration of war against the United States, criticizing its military presence in Saudi Arabia and its support for Israel. The statement, written in Arabic and circulated through underground channels, was largely ignored in Western media. To most observers, it sounded like rhetoric, angry words from a distant extremist. But within Al-Qaeda's network, it was a call to action. 2 years later, the group demonstrated its reach and determination. On August 7, 1998, simultaneous truck bombings struck the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The attacks killed over 200 people and injured thousands. For the first time, Americans witnessed the scale of this new enemy. The United States responded with cruise missile strikes on suspected training camps in Afghanistan and a factory in Sudan. The bombings became front-page news for days. But soon public attention drifted elsewhere, to domestic politics and celebrity scandals. Within intelligence communities, the pattern was becoming clear. This was no longer about small, isolated groups. It was a coordinated movement capable of strategic planning, long-term financing, and international communication. Still, the world's most powerful nations struggled to adapt their defenses to a threat that did not fit existing models. Traditional warfare relied on clear enemies, battlefields, and states, none of which applied here. The terrorists used civilian systems, air travel, banking, communication, as both tools and shields. The late 1990s also saw the rise of new technologies that unintentionally empowered these networks. The Internet allowed encrypted messaging and online fundraising. Satellite phones enabled remote coordination. Airlines connected cities across continents, making movement easy for those with legitimate documents. Globalization, which had promised unity and progress, now offered opportunity to those who wished to exploit it. In 2000, another attack signaled escalating danger. A small boat packed with explosives approached the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer docked in Yemen, and detonated alongside it, killing 17 American sailors. The precision and simplicity of the operation alarmed security experts. It proved that a small, determined team could strike even the world's most powerful military. Once again, the event was acknowledged, investigated, and then largely forgotten by the public. Inside American intelligence, frustration grew. Analysts from the CIA, NSA, and FBI noticed recurring names, patterns, and warnings. Some reports mentioned training camps in Afghanistan, connections to hijacking plans, and interest in targeting symbolic landmarks. But bureaucratic divisions, outdated technology, and legal barriers prevented a unified response. Each agency saw only a fragment of the picture. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda found a new ally in the Taliban, a fundamentalist group that had taken control of most of the country by the mid-1990s. The Taliban provided sanctuary and protection to bin Laden in exchange for money and influence. From his base near Kandahar, he continued to plan operations, record speeches, and expand his network. Recruitment videos portrayed him as a hero, a defender of faith against Western power. By 2001, Al-Qaeda had evolved into a transnational organization with hundreds of trained members, sleeper cells, and sympathizers worldwide. Its leaders believed that a massive, shocking strike could change global politics, that one spectacular act would awaken the world. The plan they were forming was audacious, nearly unimaginable. It would rely on precision, patience, and the element of surprise. But at the time, few in the West were watching. The threat was hidden in plain sight, buried in reports, whispered in briefings, overshadowed by everyday news. The machinery of normal life continued. Flights took off, offices opened, and cities bustled. The storm was building, but the sky still looked clear. Intelligence and warning signs. Throughout the late 1990s and into 2001, fragments of a coming disaster circulated quietly within the labyrinth of U.S. intelligence agencies. Bits of information, intercepted calls, suspicious visa records, odd flight school enrollments, were noticed, logged, and filed. But in a nation confident in its safety, those pieces never fit together in time. The intelligence community was vast but divided. The CIA, responsible for gathering information abroad, focused on tracking foreign terror networks. The FBI, tasked with domestic law enforcement, concentrated on cases within U.S. borders. Communication between the two was limited by law and bureaucracy, a wall built during the Cold War to protect civil liberties. In practice, that wall meant that one agency could hold crucial information that the other never saw. Warnings began years before the tragedy itself. Analysts inside the CIA noted growing activity among known extremists, unusual travel patterns, meetings in Afghanistan, the reappearance of familiar names connected to previous attacks. Reports described individuals attending flight schools in the United States, interested not in full pilot training, but specifically in how to control large commercial aircraft. At the time, such details seemed strange but not alarming. In 1999, a small group within the CIA's Counterterrorism Center began tracking a network they believed was plotting something major. The operation, code-named Alex Station, monitored al-Qaeda's movements and communications. Agents requested greater cooperation with other agencies, but their concerns were often dismissed as speculation. Political leaders and the public were focused on other matters: the new millennium, the economy, and the rapidly approaching 2000 presidential election. Then came the Millennium Plot. In December 1999, customs agents in Washington state arrested a man named Ahmed Ressam as he tried to enter the U.S. from Canada with explosives in his car. He later confessed he had planned to bomb Los Angeles International Airport. That arrest revealed a chilling reality. Terrorist networks were already attempting large-scale attacks on American soil. The plot failed, but for investigators, it confirmed that the threat was both real and immediate. Despite that, after the year 2000 passed without incident, a sense of relief returned. The government shifted its focus back to traditional concerns: diplomacy, trade, and domestic politics. Within intelligence circles, warnings continued to surface but struggled to gain traction. The bureaucracy was not built for urgency. It was built for caution. By early 2001, the Bush administration had taken office. National security priorities shifted toward missile defense and great power competition, not terrorism. A transition team inherited reports from the outgoing Clinton administration warning that al-Qaeda represented a major and immediate threat. But those documents competed with dozens of other policy briefs. Meetings were held, but no comprehensive strategy emerged. Inside the FBI, field offices noticed unsettling patterns. Agents in Phoenix, Arizona, reported Middle Eastern men attending flight schools, showing interest only in cockpit controls and large jets. An agent in Minneapolis grew suspicious of a French-Moroccan student, Zacharias Moussaoui, who wanted to learn how to fly a Boeing 747 without prior experience. She sent urgent warnings to headquarters, fearing a potential hijacking plot. Her memo was noted but not acted upon, lost in the sea of daily reports. At the same time, the CIA tracked two known al-Qaeda operatives, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar, who had attended a meeting in Malaysia linked to previous attacks. When those men entered the United States, the information was not shared with the FBI. They lived openly in California, even using their real names on driver's licenses. The system failed to connect the dots. During the summer of 2001, intelligence warnings grew louder. Intercepted messages from al-Qaeda hinted at something big coming. Foreign allies relayed similar alerts. On August 6, 2001, President Bush received a daily intelligence briefing titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." The report outlined the possibility of hijackings and mentioned previous surveillance of federal buildings and New York landmarks. Still, the information lacked specifics. No dates, no targets, no method. It was serious, but not actionable. In hindsight, those months now read like a series of missed opportunities. The pieces existed: flight school warnings, visa anomalies, intercepted messages, and known suspects. But each agency saw only a fragment. Each analyst only a hint. No one held the complete picture. And even if they had, few could imagine the scale of what was coming. The failure was not one of intelligence alone. It was also psychological. After years of peace, it was difficult for policymakers and the public alike to accept that such devastation could occur. The United States had not faced a major attack on its mainland in nearly 2 centuries. The idea of turning passenger planes into weapons was unthinkable, literally outside the imagination of most experts. In those quiet weeks of late summer 2001, the intelligence community was full of noise. Thousands of signals, reports, and analyses. Some pointed in the right direction. Others were false alarms. Sorting truth from distraction proved impossible. The machinery of national security was immense, but slow. It was designed to react, not anticipate. And so, as August turned to September, life in America continued as normal. Students returned to schools. Offices reopened after summer vacations. And the hum of ordinary life filled the cities. The warnings had been written, the clues recorded, but in a system too confident, too divided, and too accustomed to calm, no one realized that time had run out. A normal September morning. On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, the United States awoke to a sky of perfect blue. Across the East Coast, the air was cool but gentle, carrying the first hints of autumn. Commuters filled trains. Parents dropped children at school. And the usual rhythm of a weekday resumed. There was nothing unusual about that morning. No alarms. No warnings that the world was about to change. In New York City, the financial district stirred to life before sunrise. Thousands of workers flowed toward Lower Manhattan, coffee in hand, briefcases in motion. The twin towers of the World Trade Center caught the early light, standing like mirrored pillars over the Hudson. For office employees, it was another routine day of calls, reports, and meetings. Some stopped for breakfast at the plaza. Others rode the elevators to their desks on the upper floors. In Washington, D.C., traffic thickened around the Beltway as government workers made their way toward downtown. At the Pentagon, the largest office building in the world, the morning briefings had already begun. Staff discussed budgets, defense policy, and upcoming exercises. Across the Potomac, the White House prepared for a normal day of public appearances and domestic policy meetings. In Boston, Newark, and Washington, airport terminals buzzed with early travelers. The pre-flight routine was quick and familiar. Security screening consisted mostly of metal detectors and X-ray belts. Efficient, but casual by today's standards. Passengers removed laptops, showed tickets, and passed through without much delay. The idea of danger in the sky felt remote, almost absurd. For most Americans, flying remained one of the safest and most trusted forms of travel. Across the country, television networks covered the ordinary flow of news, local weather, politics, sports, entertainment. Morning shows discuss back-to-school shopping and late summer vacations. Stock markets were preparing to open. Analysts anticipated another stable trading day. Few people had reason to expect that, within hours, every broadcast in America would carry the same breaking story. The cultural atmosphere of that moment is easy to forget but important to recall. Americans felt secure, protected by oceans, technology, and the belief that major wars were things of the past. The biggest public debates centered on education reform and tax policy, not national security. when the president began his day at an elementary school in Florida. Cameras followed casually. It was meant to be a light, routine event about literacy programs. At 8 a.m., most citizens were occupied with the ordinary details of life. Checking emails, reading newspapers, catching subways, pouring another cup of coffee. Wall Street prepared for the trading bell. Students took their seats in classrooms. Pilots filed flight plans for routes that stretched across a peaceful continent. The hum of modern life felt steady and predictable. It was a world that still trusted its systems. Airlines, communication, government, routine. Citizens believed that danger was something distant, confined to foreign battlefields or history books. In offices and homes, the day began as every other day had before it, under the assumption that tomorrow would arrive unchanged. No one could sense the invisible threads connecting people and places that morning. The travelers boarding planes, the controllers watching radar screens, the commuters crossing bridges. Every detail of ordinary life moved forward as designed, unaware of the chain of events already set in motion. The blue sky over New York, the clear air over Washington, the quiet of small towns and suburbs. All of it seemed to confirm that the world was calm. That morning, America stood at its most peaceful and confident point in decades. It was, in every visible way, just another Tuesday. The turning point. History rarely announces its turning points. They arrive quietly, hidden inside ordinary moments. And only later does the world look back and realize that everything changed in a single morning. September 11th, 2001, was one of those moments. It marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. An invisible line dividing the world that was from the world that would follow. For decades, Americans had believed their homeland was untouchable. Wars happened elsewhere. Revolutions belonged to history books. And danger could be contained by borders and technology. That confidence was not arrogance. It was the product of peace, prosperity, and distance. The attacks that followed shattered that illusion, showing that in a globalized age, no nation stood completely apart from the world's instability. What made that day so transformative was not only the scale of loss, but the sudden collapse of certainty. In a matter of hours, institutions that once felt permanent, commerce, travel, security, were thrown into question. Airports closed, markets froze, and people across the globe stopped to watch as events unfolded in disbelief. The sense of safety that had defined the 1990s dissolved into a new atmosphere of fear, unity, and awakening. From that morning onward, time itself seemed to split. There was before, when the skyline stood unbroken and air travel felt routine. And there was after, when every sound in the sky carried new meaning and every headline spoke of a changed world. The United States, and much of the planet, entered a new century not of optimism, but of vigilance. In the weeks that followed, the word terrorism became part of everyday speech. Flags appeared in windows and on car antennas. People searched for understanding, for someone to explain how such a thing could happen. Leaders promised justice and security. Intelligence agencies reorganized, and new laws redefined the balance between freedom and safety. The world began to speak a new language, one shaped by loss, resilience, and the determination never to be surprised again. Yet even amid grief, something else emerged. A renewed sense of shared identity. For a brief time, divisions faded. Strangers helped one another. Communities came together. And a quiet realization spread that humanity's vulnerabilities were universal. The attack had targeted one nation, but its shock was felt everywhere. It reminded the world that technology could connect us not only through progress, but through tragedy. Looking back, the calm of the early morning now feels like another lifetime. A world defined by innocence and trust. Few people realized, as they stepped out their doors that day, that they were living the final hours of a simpler age. The events of that morning would change security policies, foreign relations, even the way people moved through airports or viewed the horizon. The 21st century began not with a celebration, but with a reckoning. In the years since, historians have called that day many things. A tragedy, an awakening, a dividing line. But perhaps the most accurate word is turning point. It forced nations to reconsider power, intelligence, and vulnerability. It reshaped the meaning of peace. And it reminded humanity that history never truly ends. It only waits for its next chapter. The calm before the storm had ended. From that morning onward, the world would move differently, speak differently, and remember differently. A new age had begun. One born not from victory or discovery, but from the realization that even in moments of perfect peace, the course of history can change forever.